Hi, so today we're going to be talking about acceptable use policies with a specific focus on the PG County Public Schools acceptable use policy. So what exactly is an acceptable use policy? Acceptable use policies are typically written for any company or organization that uses technology or has a computer network. An AUP delineates between acceptable and unacceptable uses by users, and it explains the consequences for violating the agreement. Now you may be wondering, why exactly are AUPs necessary? An AUP basically protects the company or organization against the users who may attempt to perform illegal activity or may not know that they're doing something that's illegal or that violates a policy, and the company wants to protect itself against that kind of situation. But the AUP also protects every user from the other users of that device or technology or people that are connected to the network. So now we're going to look at more specifically the Prince George's County AUP. There's a link here that you can go to and download the AUP. If you go to the county website, pgcps.org, you can also find the AUP as Administrative Procedure 0700. Now we're going to take a quick look at some of the main points found in the AUP. The first point that we're going to look at says anyone accessing the county network is bound by the AUP, including people who connect to the Wi-Fi. Thus, you don't have to actually agree specifically in order to be bound by the AUP. So anyone who comes into a county school or any county building that has Wi-Fi, if their device connects to it, they're knowingly or unknowingly agreeing to be bound by the AUP without, like, they're giving their consent even if they haven't physically signed anything. Another feature of the AUP is that if you bring your personal device to school and you connect to the network, technically your personal device is now legally bound by the AUP, including all the files in your device. Another feature is that each user is responsible for the content on their account. So for example, if you forget to log out and someone else does something inappropriate on your account, that inappropriate activity is going to be traced back to you, and you're going to be held accountable because it was done while your account was logged in. So obviously then it's really important to make sure everyone is logging out when they're done with whatever they're doing on their account. Another feature of the AUP says that all devices and internet usage are limited to educational uses only. So as a teacher, if you're on your school computer or your school iPad or Chromebook or something like that, if you're, in your free time, like if during your lunch or before school or after school, if you're in the school building but you're on school property, if you choose, say for example, you shop online, that's not an educational activity and you're breaking the AUP. Even if it's not something that you're just doing during class, like obviously you shouldn't shop online during class, but say you're doing it during lunch, you're still breaking the AUP. And if a student plays a game or watches a video maybe on YouTube or something like that that the teacher didn't want them doing, that's not an educational video, then they're breaking the AUP also. Another feature, obviously, is that bullying, harassment, abusive language, and anonymous messages are prohibited for all users connected to the network. The last thing that we're going to look at is that if it's proven that a user has violated the AUP, they immediately lose access to the network and they face disciplinary consequences. And one thing I found is that the AUP didn't really specify what the consequences would be, like what the progress, an order of, like, for repeated violations and so forth. But it did mention that there would be a letter of reprimand, which I assume would be directed towards teachers, because I don't think they would send a letter of reprimand to a student. I assume that that letter of reprimand would go into a teacher's file and be held there. Also, if it's an egregious violation, with criminal activity, there could be an arrest or prosecution for a user who did an extreme violation of the AUP. So how can we get the word out about the stuff that's in the AUP to parents, to students, and to other staff members? First off, for parents and students, I don't think there's a good procedure right now for giving parents and students the AUP. I don't really think they know what's in it. unless, for example, they chose to go to the county website and search for what their kids were agreeing to when they use school property. Um, However, there is something called a Rights and Responsibilities Handbook that students are given at the beginning of each year. And in that handbook, there is simplified language of the AUP. So it breaks it down in pretty simple terms for kids as to what they can do and what they can't do on school devices. And those handbooks, they're supposed to be taken home by the students. There's an agreement in there that they sign. The parents are supposed to sign it. Then the school keeps it on record, and the kids are supposed to take the handbook home for the parents to use. But again, I don't think parents very often actually end up seeing that book. I don't think the kids, at least at the high school level, are taking it home very often. Um, Another way that we could get the information out to parents and students is by distributing either the Rights and Responsibilities Handbook or the actual AUP itself at PTA meetings and at back to school night. Other than that, it's hard to get a large group of parents into the school at the same time. And as for communication to staff members, whenever any staff member is hired, the AUP is something that you have to sign. I don't really think the AUP is ever mentioned specifically again. I know for me personally, in 8 years of teaching, it's never been specifically brought up, hey, this is the stuff that's written in the AUP. You have to make sure that you're abiding by it. It's never been communicated to me. So I think we could improve in communication to staff as well. Maybe just by putting it on the county website or by holding professional development, just mentioning it to staff during the professional development. So the next thing that we're concerned about as teachers is how are we going to implement the AUP for the students? What can we as teachers do to make sure the students understand the AUP? And I think the first and the main key thing for this is that we can explain the policy to students. They're only seeing the simplified language in the Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. They're not seeing the actual AUP. But I think if we showed it to them as teachers uh, and explained what does this language say, what does it actually mean, I'm pretty sure they can understand it. And if there was a time where we needed to simplify some of the language, obviously we could do that. Another thing that we could do is just simplify it for ourselves and make a do's and don'ts poster and put it up in our classroom so the kids have easy access to know things that are okay and things that aren't okay while they're using our technology. Another thing that we could do is at the beginning of the year have skits. It's just in our classes is kind of like an icebreaker activity to act out scenarios of acceptable and unacceptable practices. And then the students they would naturally create class discussions about, hey, why was this okay? Or hey, why was this not okay? What was they doing in this scenario that was unacceptable? Why were they breaking the policy in this scenario? And lastly, I think another thing that we could do is just maybe make a short quiz about the AUP, showing the kids the AUP, and then quizzing them about what's the content in here, so that they actually are assessed in some way about showing that they know what they're allowed to do versus what they're not allowed to do. And then finally, the AUP lists some consequences. Um, and just as teachers, it's really important that we enforce the policy. If we've seen it and we know consequences and we let our kids violate it and get away with it, then we're not doing them any service. It's important that we enforce the policy. Teachers who enforce the rules that they make in their classroom usually end up being the most effective teachers because they're sticking to their word and kids respect that. So as teachers, how can we make sure that we're abiding by the AUP? I think one good thing, and maybe as a professional development activity, would be to create a day in the life of what exactly is a teacher do during the day? What do they do that could be okay? What do they do that might not be okay? If we made through a fictional scenario, we could go through as staff and talk about what things are okay that they're doing, how are they violating it, if they're violating it, what things are safe, what things maybe are innocuous that actually end up violating the policy. You're not doing something that's criminal, but you're still violating the policy. How, in what ways? And we could talk about that as staff. Um, Another thing I think that could help for the staff members is having a technology committee. And one of the roles of that technology committee could be kind of a no-fault consultation. So teachers who are not sure about things that they're doing, whether or not they violate the AUP, could go talk to a member of the technology committee and ask them, hey, is what I'm doing okay or is it not okay? And the technology committee would be really well versed in acceptable practices for the AUP and could just let them know, hey, that's okay, or no, what you're doing is not okay. You should probably stop doing it before administration catches it and you get in serious trouble. Lastly, I think one good thing was you could just give the teachers a quiz on the AUP, like let them see it, let them read through it, and then give them a quiz. Obviously, can't be a grade assigned to it because you're teachers, but just letting them know, hey, these are some things that you are expected to know, and then quizzing them on it. So lastly, here are some of the sites I went through to get research for this. Um, I didn't mention the Northwestern High School iPad policy so much, but my school has an iPad. We have an iPad program, and I helped make the iPad policy. And it's just the key for that is we just focused on simple language that the kids could understand, and then they had an agreement that they had to sign before they used the iPads at our school. I also looked at the class discussion that we had and the ISTE standards in coming up with parts of my presentation. Thanks. I hope this is helpful in letting you know what an AUP is and looking at the Prince George's County acceptable use policy.